So today we're going to wrap up this series, and I feel like I should warn those of you who haven't been with us through this series. It's not a political series, so you can relax. That's not what we're talking about. Here's the whole point of the series, and if you are interested and intrigued by today, you can go back on our app or on our website, YouTube channel, whatever you want to do, and you can follow along. Our Roku channel, we're Apple TV, we're a bunch of different places. The point of the series is simply this. Those of us who are followers of Jesus, and if you're not, I would never assume and presume to tell you what your role and responsibility is, but for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we've been talking about the fact that we have played a role in the divisiveness, in the tension, and the division that exists in our country for a lot of years now. Christians, I feel like, have contributed to that. It's my opinion, but I think we've contributed in some significant ways to that. And I feel like those of us who follow Jesus have a responsibility to step into our current climate in our communities and in our nation and respond in a way that creates or leads to a more united or a reunited States of America. And the reason I feel like we have that responsibility is because when Jesus showed up on this earth, this is exactly what he did. He showed up in a time of extraordinary division, tension, prejudice, of discrimination of all different kinds. And he set an extraordinary example of what it looked like to lean into those situations and to create or lend himself to fostering unity instead of more division. And so we've been talking about what that looks like. And the truth of the matter is our country is extremely diverse, so everybody won't agree on the best way to get there. Our church is diverse, so we may not agree on all the best ways to get there. But I think the one thing we can agree on that I have mentioned throughout the series is simply the idea that what's best for people is what's best. We can all agree, even though we don't always do it, we can all agree that we should at least be making decisions based on what's best for people. We can all agree, hey, we want what's best for people. We may not agree on how. You may think it's one way. I may think it's another. You may think if people believe this or people followed this plan, it'd be best for people, and somebody else thinks no, it should be this plan. Like, we disagree on all that stuff, but we can agree that what's best for people is what's best. And what I've suggested to you is that now, as much as ever, one of the things that would be best for people is if we would learn to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because we see the exact opposite in our culture today. And let's be honest, it's not just other people. It's us too. We are very slow to listen. We are extremely quick to speak. And oftentimes we are quick to become angry. We're quick to tell people what we think. We're quick to make our points. We're quick to try to prove we're right. But we have lost the art in some respects of sitting down across a table from somebody who differs from us, from somebody who's different than us in any realm, and learning how to listen, being willing to just hear what they have to say, and while we may not agree with it, to at least try to see life from their point of view. And if those of us who are Christians would just do a better job of that, it would make a world of impact in our communities. And if enough Christians did around the country, it'd make a world of impact in our country. And I feel like we have a responsibility to do that. It's not a responsibility to agree with everybody in their position. That's not true. That's not even possible. But you can disagree with someone's position, but still agree that that person is valuable and listen to them and respect them and treat them in a way that communicates dignity and worth and value. You don't have to respect every position in order to respect a person. You don't have to feel like every position you hear is equally valid. That's irrational and illogical. It's impossible. Every opinion is not equally valid, but every person is equally valuable. And if we would learn to be able to separate those two things and to listen even though we disagree, to instead of trying to make a point or prove that we're right, and if we just give people the space and the opportunity to share their point of view and try to embrace things from their perspective, it would go a long way towards creating a more united or reunited States of America. So over the last few weeks, we've been talking about what that looks like, and if you weren't with us last week, you ought to go watch last week at least. We did a panel discussion, and Omar and Stacy and William joined us and did a phenomenal job. They were so incredible, sharing some different perspectives on what this looks like for them. And so you might want to go check that out. Today I want to wrap this up with some really practical steps. Some really practical steps around this question. How do we, whether you're Christian or not, follower of Jesus or not, how do we create or foster unity in the current climate and culture of our communities and of our country? What does it look like for us in very practical terms? If you've been tracking along with this series, you've heard this, but what does it really mean to do this? Because it's one thing to say, yeah, we should all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to be angry. We could all agree with that. But it's much harder to do, isn't it? Let's be honest. You walk out here on Sunday nodding your head going, I wish more people would do that. And then we run into somebody who ticks us off during the week. Or we run into a situation that really frustrates us. Or we run into a person that believes something that we just think makes no sense whatsoever. And the next thing we know, we're being slow to listen, quick to speak, and quick to get angry again. So it's very hard to practice. So practically speaking, what are the steps we need to take in order to do this? What does it look like to practice it? I'll tell you what, at least my first inclination is, and I'm guessing it's yours. I think by default, whenever we begin to think of, well, what needs to change, the first thing we think that needs to change is the other person. Well, if those people would just change, and if those people would just get it figured out, and if those people would just fix that, we all have a tendency to point fingers. When it comes to politics, we watch this happen all the time. Democrats say, well, if we could just get more power, and if the Republicans would just change this and this, then everything would be better. And Republicans, ironically enough, say the exact same thing about Democrats, right? If we could just have more power here, and if they would just change, then, everybody has a tendency to point fingers. Pointing fingers, it seems, has become a national pastime. We all tend to do it. It's just default for us. Even personally, you think about when there's tension or division in your workplace, what's your go-to thing? Your first thought is, well, if my boss would just change, or if those employees would just change, or if that teammate would just change. Same thing with school, same thing at home. If my spouse would just change, if my kids would just change, if my parents would just change. We all have a tendency to point fingers. The problem is pointing fingers never leads to progress. Never, ever, ever works. So, the truth of the matter is, if we were going to own this and be honest, I'll just speak for myself. As much as I hate to admit this, the truth of the matter is I have done more to undermine my own growth, my own happiness, and my own success than anyone else I know. I can point the fingers and blame a lot of people, but the reality is I've done more to undermine my success than anybody else I know. As a matter of fact, this is a little embarrassing to admit, but you're a friendly crowd, so I'm going to admit it, okay? The truth of the matter is I have participated in every bad decision I've ever made. That's so terrible to admit. It looks bad, doesn't it? But it's true. I started thinking about this as I was preparing, and I was like, this is awful. I've been present for every single bad decision I've ever made. I point fingers and blame other people, but the reality is there is only one common denominator in every bad decision I made, and it's me. I've been there and participated in all of them. Every bad leadership decision is me. Every bad career decision, I was there. Every bad financial decision, every impulsive decision, every one of those decisions where you're on Amazon and you're buying something and then you know how they pop up and say, customers who bought this also like, and the next thing you know, your cart's 5 times what it was. I participated in all those. You have too. I participated in every single decision relationally that turned out to be bad. In every decision, gossip there, and I said that there, and I shouldn't have said that there, and I got angry there, and I shouldn't have got angry there. I participated in every bad parenting decision I've ever made. I participated in every bad marriage decision. I want to clarify, I don't mean who I married. That was a great decision. I want to take credit for that one. But within that marriage, there have been a lot of things that have happened that were bad decisions, and I've participated in every single one of them. It's a little frustrating when you stop to think about it, and that's a little embarrassing to admit, but yeah, I have been present. I have participated in every bad decision I've ever made. So why in the world am I pointing fingers at everybody else when I'm the common denominator? Now, while I said it was a little embarrassing to admit, the reality is I don't mind admitting that to you because I know you're not any better than me. You have participated in every bad decision you've ever made. It's true, isn't it? And this is why I want to talk about for a few minutes. This is why the reality is the greatest challenge that you have and the greatest challenge that I have, and if you want to look at it from a macro perspective, the greatest challenge our country has is not to change the other person. It's not to change other people. It's not to change the other political party. It's not to change anybody else. The greatest challenge that we have is not to change anybody in D.C. It's for you to change you, and it's for me to change me. The greatest challenge we have is to wake up every morning and lead that American that you see in the mirror. That's the greatest challenge you have. That is the greatest challenge I have. What am I going to do to lead myself? What am I going to do to lead that American that's staring me in the face every morning that tends to get in his own way and be a part of every bad decision that he makes? What am I going to do to lead myself? If we were honest, that is a challenge we don't fully have the answer to. And the reason I know we don't fully have the answer to is because you still do things just like I still do things that disappoint ourselves. Now think about that. We're not talking about some standard God created and, I think God's disappointed with me. We're not even talking about a standard a spouse or a parent or a kid or a friend has of us and, I think I disappointed them. No. You have some standards for yourself. You have some things that you believe to the core of your being. If I do those things, it will be better for me and I will be happier in life. And then you violate the very things you believe are better for you and will make you happier. Why do you do that? Because you have a hard time leading yourself. And I have a hard time leading myself. So how in the world do you do that? That's what I want to talk about for a few minutes as we wrap up this series. Now, fortunately for us, the Apostle Paul wrote some instruction and gave some very clear direction on what this looks like and why this is so important. What I find so fascinating about Paul's background, if you didn't grow up in church, you may not know all of this, but Paul grew up, and for the early years of his career, he hated Christians. He was not one, he hated them. They didn't even call them Christians then. They just called them followers of Jesus or followers of the way. And Paul, for his career, was a religious professional. He was part of Judaism. He saw this new sect, as he called it, being formed as a threat to Judaism. And there was so much division between the two and tension between the two that Paul said, I'm just going to put an end to that because we don't want to have that in our country. And so he was going around arresting Christians. He was going around persecuting Christians. In some cases, he was having Christians killed to try to put an end to this Jesus movement and these Jesus followers. Until one day, Paul has an encounter with Jesus after his resurrection. And Paul realizes, oops, I was wrong. I think if he's back alive, then I think I'm on the wrong side of this. And so Paul spent the rest of his life trying to spread the message of Jesus, the central component and message that Jesus had come to teach. And he's writing to a group of Christians in Galatia. And in the middle of this letter that he writes, he circles back to this central idea and tries to help them understand why it's so important as they try to lead themselves well and as they try to foster in a first century culture where there's so much tension, division, prejudice, discrimination of all kinds, how they could foster and create unity in the midst of that. So I want to read you what he said, and then I want to give you 3 really practical decisions you can make and I can make to better lead the American in the mirror that we look at every single morning. So here's what Paul wrote. In Galatians 5, he said, you, my brothers and sisters, so he's writing to fellow followers of Jesus, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. Now, as he writes that, he is writing that in reference to one of Jesus' most famous statements he ever made. And if you're not a Christian or a Jesus follower, you've heard this statement. You may not have known it was Jesus who first said it, but politicians use this, sometimes athletes use this. You hear this in all kinds of different sectors. But Paul was simply echoing something Jesus had said, which was, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall, what? Yeah, set you free. Some of you knew that. Thank you. Y'all seem to sound really excited about that. The truth shall what? Yeah, set you free. You've heard that, right? You've heard that. This is what Paul's referring to. So basically, Paul was helping them to remember a simple truth. That Jesus taught the first step towards you being free. Free in what way? Well, not free physically. That's not what he's talking about. Free from all the junk that rattles around inside of you. Free from all the stuff that's keeping you from being who you want to be and who God created you to be. Paul said, if you're going to be free from all the stuff that gets in your way and makes it difficult for you to lead yourself and live up to who you want to become and who God wants you to be, if you want to be free from all that, you have to start by being honest. You have to start with the truth. The truth is what sets you free. You have to be willing to own your piece of the pie. You have to stop pointing fingers and blaming everybody else. Well, I got mad, but it was because, and well, I made that selfish choice, but they did this, and well, I wouldn't have if they hadn't, and all those people would change. Now, you got to stop pointing fingers, and you got to own your piece of the pie, whatever the piece of the pie is. It may be the majority of the pie. It may be 40% of the pie, 20% of the pie. You may think it's only 2 or 3% of the pie. Paul said, doesn't matter. Don't worry about pointing fingers at other people and what percent they own. Why don't you own your part of the problem? Because the truth is what will set you free. And the whole point of Jesus inviting you to follow him was for you to experience freedom. Freedom from all the mess inside of you. Freedom from all the stuff that's holding you back from being who God created you to be. But if you're going to become that kind of person, you got to start with owning your part. You got to start with the truth. The truth frees. Now, on the other hand, you know this, dishonesty imprisons. The truth will set you free. Being dishonest will actually imprison you. And we all have this extraordinary ability to be dishonest with ourselves. We call it self-deception. And you are just like me. You have an uncanny ability to deceive yourself. This is why you watch decisions that your friends make, and you immediately know that is a terrible decision. That's never going to work out. Matter of fact, here's what's going to happen. And you predict the future of your friend, and then sure enough, it happens, and you say, I told you so. Why'd you think that was a good idea? But then you'll turn around and make a decision and convince yourself it's good when your friend's going, nope, that's never going to work out. What's the difference? Well, you have crystal clear clarity into the stupidity of your friends because you're not involved. But you will deceive yourself to get what you want every single time if you don't figure out a way to overcome it. And I'm the same way. Self-deception sabotages your future. Self-deception is what causes you to continue to put on repeat the mistakes of your past and just circle back to them again and again. I made the same mistake again. I did it again. I did it again. I did it again. That is caused by self-deception. It imprisons you. So Paul said, you got to start by understanding you were called to be free, but that freedom that God extends to you to be who you want to be, that freedom that comes in the form of forgiveness and grace and mercy and strength, it's not just about you. Paul goes on, he says, don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. That's his way of saying, don't use your freedom just to do whatever you want to do, like you got a get out of jail free card, and there's this, forgiveness card. I'll do whatever I want, doesn't matter what I do or who I hurt, and I'll just swipe the forgiveness card. He says, no, don't do that. The whole reason Jesus does in you what he does in you is so you can serve one another humbly in love. And then he sums it up this way. For the entire law, and Paul's talking about the law of Moses. He's writing to Jewish people, so they would have gotten this. Paul said all those laws that our people have been trying to follow for years and years and years. All those laws that told us how to relate to each other. All those laws that told us how to function as a united country. Paul said, well, all those laws are fulfilled in keeping one command. Jesus showed up and he made it really simple. Just love your neighbor as yourself. Just love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, Jesus has freed you not for your benefit, but for the benefit of other people. Jesus has freed you not so you would serve you, but so you would serve the you beside you humbly in love. Now, this is so important for the conversation we're having throughout this series, and here's why. Because serving one another opens the door to unity with one another. Now, you know this intuitively. The people that you love and care about most, you are most motivated to serve them. And you know the more you serve that person, what does it do to that relationship? It draws you closer together. It opens the door to greater unity or to stronger unity between you and that person. The point Paul is making is this. That's great. You ought to do that. But Jesus didn't just free you and call you to serve the people you like. He called you to serve all one another's, including the people you disagree with, including the people that you don't see eye to eye about something, including the people who, it's such a strong word, you might not use the word enemy, but you don't really want to be around them. You don't want anything to do with them. You don't want to have to deal with them in your life. Paul says, I want you to think about those people, the people where there's tension and division in the relationship between you and them. And then why don't you lean in if you're a follower of Jesus? Why don't you lean in and serve that person humbly in love? To which we all go, I don't want to do that. Paul says, okay, you cannot do that. But when you serve, it opens the door to the possibility and the path of unity with that person. It doesn't guarantee it, but it opens the door to it. Now think about it for a minute. Who are the people? The people at school, the people at work, the roommate, the people in your family, the spouse, the kid, the parent. Who are the people right now that, it's just so tense. It's just so difficult to be around them. It's so hard to live with them. You just want to give up on that relationship entirely. What would it look like if you seized the opportunity instead of leaning away to lean in and to humbly serve them? You say, well, they won't care. It's not going to change anything. It might not. But you're doing what you can do to open the door to the possibility of unity with that person. Can I remind you, if you're a follower of Jesus, this is exactly what our leader did for us. when he looked down at a world that was dark and broken, when he looked down at a world full of people who had rebelled against him, he did not lean away. He leaned in. He showed up. And in spite of the fact we didn't deserve it, he served us humbly in love, ultimately giving his life on a cross to pay the penalty for our sins. So how can we not, after our Savior did that for us and opened the door to unity between us and God, how can we not do that for one another? Now, there is something in you and in me, and I get this, I'm no different than you, that finds that so hard to do, that just want to resist. I'm never going to do that. I wouldn't dare. They'll take advantage. I mean, we have so many reasons why we don't want to do it. But I think what Paul would say to us is this: well, what's the alternative? And how's the alternative working for you? As a matter of fact, he addresses this with the Galatians. He goes on, he says this: if you bite and devour each other, watch out or you'll be destroyed by each other. In other words, okay, you want to keep doing what you're currently doing, you want to keep attacking, you want to keep criticizing, you want to keep blaming, you want to keep pointing fingers, you want to keep saying it's their problem and their fault and their problem and their fault and their problem and their fault. Paul says you can keep doing that, but how's that working out for you? That is not a road that leads to joy, to happiness, to contentment. That is a road that leads to you undermining and self-sabotaging your own future and all the things that you most want to experience in life and all the qualities you most want to be yourself. He says you're just going to devour one another. It's not the way to do it. You've got to learn to lead yourself and do the next right thing, even if it's the thing you don't want to do, but to do it because it's going to be best for you and best for the people around you. And serving humbly in love, leaning in and serving is one of the ways that you open the door to unity with one another. So, that being said, here's what I want to do for the next few minutes. I want to get really practical. I want to give you 3 decisions, and I'm going to tell you up front, these 3 decisions are very hard to practice. They're going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort over an extended period of time. But if you will practice these 3 decisions, it will help you to become more of who you want to be. It will help you to become more of who God created you to be. And maybe most importantly for the context of this series, these 3 decisions will help you to be a person who participates in and contributes to creating a more united or a reunited States of America and a more united or reunited community, and on a personal level, a more or reunited workplace, family, and relational environment. So, let me give them to you. We'll unpack them for just a minute. Here's the first one. If you want to lead yourself, you have to decide, I will not lie to myself, even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. I'm not going to lie to myself. I'm not going to deceive myself, even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. Now, you don't hear this much in our culture today, but the reality is there is something much worse than feeling bad about yourself. It is ignoring the bad in yourself. So if you just keep deceiving yourself that the bad in you isn't really that bad and doesn't need to be fixed, the bad in you is going to self-sabotage everything that you want in life. It's actually much better to look at yourself in the mirror and go, I'm going to own that there's some bad in me, and it makes me feel bad that I have to admit that there's bad in me, but I'm going to own it because that's the first step to changing it. And if I'm going to get better in the long run, I've got to feel worse in the moment. I've got to own this. I cannot lie to myself, even when it makes me feel bad about myself. But we all, as I said earlier, we all have this extraordinary capacity to lie to ourselves. And if you're going to lead yourself well, then you have to be willing to fire the liar inside of you and instead hire the truth teller who's going to look you right back in the mirror and go, nope, this is what's really going on in you and this is what needs to change. Otherwise, you will spend the rest of your life, every time there's conflict, tension, or division, pointing a finger and blaming somebody else, and the situation will never, ever improve because you don't have the power to change anybody but yourself. So, how do you do this in a practical way? I'm going to give you a question that I use. I've used it for a lot of years. When I find myself in the middle of a situation where I know I'm tempted to lie to myself, or I think, I'm not sure I'm being entirely honest, here is the question that I ask myself. Why do I want to do this? And then you got to add this. Really? The why do I want to do this question, if you stop right there, well, that is the answer that you tell all the people around you when they say, well, why are you doing that? And you've spun it. Like you've told yourself a lie enough that you've convinced yourself, oh, there's a really good reason to do that. There's a really good reason to buy that. There's a really good reason to get out of that relationship or into that relationship. There's a really good reason for this, to go there. You convince yourself of that, and then that's what you tell everybody else. But you got to go a step further. You got to say, okay, I know what I'm telling everybody else, but that's not important. I need to know why I want to do this really. Why do I want to rent this? Why do I want to spend this? Why do I want to purchase that? Why do I want to move there? Why do I want to change jobs? Why do I want to be in that relationship? Why do I want to spend more time with her? Why do I want to spend more time around him? Why do I want to get out of that relationship? Why am I trying to avoid her? Why am I making the choices that I'm making? You owe it to yourself to be honest with yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. Even if you don't change what you do, you owe it to yourself not to lie to yourself. You owe it to yourself to at least walk into that decision knowing I'm not doing this for a good reason, and I know it's not going to turn out right, but I want to do it anyway. You at least ought to be honest enough with yourself to admit that. You've got to get to the point where you make a decision. I'm not going to lie to myself, even when it makes me feel bad about myself. I find myself in an argument. I find myself wanting to lash out. I find myself wanting to say something negative about them. I find myself wanting to point a finger and blame. Nope. Why am I wanting to do that, really? Maybe I'm just trying to deflect from my part of the problem. Maybe I'm just trying to keep from owning my share of the blame. You got to be willing to look in the mirror. If you're going to lead yourself well, you got to learn how to look in the mirror and be 100% truthful and honest with yourself about yourself. Second decision is this: I will prioritize what I value most over what I want now. You can't lead yourself well unless you learn how to do this. And what I have found in my experience is what I value most and what I want now are rarely the same thing. Have you noticed this? What I value most is to be healthy and fit. What I want right now is that chocolate bourbon pie right there. Not a piece, the pie. That's what I want right now. Just slide that whole thing over, you know. We've all been there, right? What we want now never aligns with what we value most. So you have to learn to be very intentional about prioritizing what I want most versus what I want now. You got to figure that out. Now, my assumption when I mention this, my assumption is that you know what you value most, and you may not actually know that. So you may need to start by figuring out what you value most. If you haven't ever done the exercise of sitting down and forcing yourself to define what you value most and writing it down, you owe it to yourself to do that. Because that is the final destination for you. Those are your guiding principles for life. You need to know and define exactly what those are. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, good news for you is you have a clean piece of paper, and you can just figure out however you want to figure it out what you value most, okay? I wouldn't presume to tell you what that should be. For those of us who are Christians, it's a little different because Jesus showed up, and he actually defined for us the things we should value most. And it's very difficult to follow him but not value what he valued. He showed up and said, you should serve one another humbly in love. Not just the one another's you like, but all one another's. That's what you should value. You should value not just loving your neighbor as yourself. Jesus took it another step and said, you should value loving one another the way I have loved you. You should value joy and compassion and generosity and kindness and selflessness and sacrificial love. Now, we talk about those things, and for some of us, our initial thought is, I'm not going to value that stuff. That stuff sounds so soft. So let me just remind you that the values that Jesus modeled and held when he was here, they weren't soft. They led him to hang on a Roman cross where he was covered in his own blood and bodily fluid. Those values cost him dearly, but he wasn't willing to compromise them. So they're not soft. You've got to decide, are you going to value what your leader and your Savior valued? It's very hard to follow him well if you don't. Now, the argument I would make is this, that what Jesus valued, that's actually the stuff that you know and want to value most. For instance, if you think about what you want people to say about you one day at your funeral, I bet you want them to use terms to describe the values Jesus said we ought to value. You don't want to get to the end of your life and have people stand up and highlight different honors and achievements off your resume. That's actually not what you want anybody to say about you. You want people to tell stories and talk about the kind of person you were and the kind of impact that you made on others and how you lived for a purpose bigger than yourself, and it wasn't about you. You want them to describe you as generous and kind and compassionate and loving and joyful and patient. You want the values of Jesus to be true of you at the end of your life. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but I bet you have. We have probably all been to funerals. I've been to a lot of them where you can tell the people who were that way and the people who weren't. Because when you go to a funeral of someone who chose every day to prioritize what they value most over what they want now, those are the people where there's a line of folks wanting to tell stories. And they stand up and they tell story after story after story of the impact that this person made on their life. And then you go to other funerals where that person focused on what they wanted now more than what they valued most. Even though they had the best intentions and valued all the right stuff, they just didn't live it out and make choices that aligned with it. You show up at those funerals and you know what, you can't hardly find anybody to say anything. Those are the funerals where people get up and they just say a few quick words and then they're done, and there's not much to say and there aren't many stories to tell. And you ask about the person and they start talking about their career and how successful they were, and they accomplished this and this, and you're going, okay, yeah, but well, what about personally? And there's just not much there. So this is what you want, but you have to make an intentional choice, and I have to make an intentional choice if we're going to lead ourselves well, to value what we want most over what we want now. Then the third decision is this: if you're going to lead yourself well, you have to decide, I'll not attempt to lead myself by myself. I can't do it by myself. I'm going to need some help. Now, for some of us, this is hard to admit. For some of us, we push back on this every time we hear it. For some of us, and sometimes it's women, but a lot of times, at least in the conversations I have, it's with guys who are going, nope, I can figure this out on my own. But you can't figure it out on your own. I know you can't figure it out on your own because you're still doing things that violate your own values. You're still doing things you know are not in your best interest, and you do them anyway. You've had these conversations, right? Not the, hey, why do I want to do this really conversations and then make the right choice. No, you've had the conversations where you did something that violated your own values, and then on the backside you ask yourself, well, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Well, the reason you did that is because you didn't surround yourself with people who valued most the things that you valued most. And I don't care what age you are, your friends and the relationships around you still influence the quality and the direction of your life. Now, I think I can prove to you in a pretty simple way that you can't lead yourself by yourself. Because all I have to do is ask you to think about your greatest regrets in life. And I don't even need to know your story. Here's what I know about your greatest regrets. They were not done in isolation. When you tell the story of your greatest regrets, there are always some other people involved in the story. And at the time, you called those people, and this is interesting, you called those people friends. Now you're like, I don't want to see them again. I don't want to talk to them again. I feel so bad, But at the time, these were your friends who were encouraging you and a part of activities that have become your greatest regrets. How could that happen? Well, it could happen because those friends and you had common interest, but you didn't have common values. And when you have friends with common interests but not common values, it's a recipe for disaster. So you've got to be intentional enough to surround yourself with some people who don't just have common interest with you, but they value most what you value most, and they're going to call you out. When you start lying to yourself, they're going to say, nope, I don't think that's the real reason why you're doing that. And when they find you choosing what you want now over what you want most, they're going to say, hey, let's just hit pause and talk about that for a minute. You need some friends like that. This is why, for those of you who've been around here, you've heard me say this so many times, but this is why I keep coming back to you and saying, you can sit in rows and listen to me speak, and that's, maybe that's fun. Hopefully it's helpful. That's our goal. But in the end, it is not nearly as impactful for you as getting a group of friends around you every week, being in a group where you've got some people to provide the support around what you value most and the direction you're trying to go in life. It's why circles are better than rows, because this relational component is so incredibly powerful in your life. I don't care how young or old you may be. You need it, and so do I. Now, if I can take 2 minutes real quickly for a quick aside, I want to talk to those of you who are parents for a second, because here's what I see in my line of work. As parents, you have some desires and goals for your kid or your kids. There are some things that you want your child or children to value the most. You want them to grow up and become a certain kind of person. And I bet if you were to write those things down, and hopefully you have, but if you haven't, you ought to. If you write those things down, they're probably spot on. Those are the things you ought to value most. But what I watch happen time after time, and I get it, it's so easy to do, is then as parents, we have a tendency to make decisions based on what we want now or what our kids want now at the expense of what we value most. And we actually make decisions in terms of how we operate as a family, and we make decisions in terms of how we utilize our time and our money as a family towards what we want now. And it puts us on a path that is an exact opposite of direction of what we want most. And the reason I know this, I've spent my whole life watching this dynamic, because growing up as a pastor's kid and now being a pastor, I can't tell you how many emails and phone calls and conversations I have personally had or witnessed where a parent has walked up and said, please, please, please help. I'm having trouble with my child. And they would describe their 15, their 16-year-old, their 18, their 19, their 20-year-old who'd walked away from church and walked away from faith, and the relationship with the parents was difficult, and there was all this tension and division. And these kids, you could smell their bad attitude like 3 miles away. You know what I'm talking about. We've all been there and done that ourselves. So it was just so rough, and they would show up and say, hey, we need help. We need help. What do we do? I don't know what you do. I mean, what we try to do is we try to support and help as much as we can, but the reality is you've already done what you did that got you to where you are. So as a parent, you should spend a lot of time thinking about whatever stage or season you're at right now. What should you be doing now to help lead your child or children in the direction of who you want them to become? And if your decisions of how you spend your time and your money and how you operate as a family aren't contributing and supporting and moving you in that direction, you ought to change what you're doing. It's one of the things I love most about our church. My wife and I, just as parents, we are thoroughly satisfied customers. We take advantage of this all the time because we've structured all of our kid and student environments to put people around your student, adults and other students around your student, who value most what you want your student to value most. And for Jen and I as parents, this is just phenomenal for us because there are certain things we're trying to instill in our kids, and we want them to spend as much time as they can around other adults and other kids their age who are also valuing those same things. And we've reaped incredible benefits from it, parenting. I don't think we're incredible parents, but what we've been smart enough to do is we've been smart enough to put our kids in a support system on a consistent basis. They're here every Sunday. They don't have a choice. Their dad's a pastor, so they got to come, right? So they're here every week, in those environments, building relationships with those kids and with those other adults. And it has been huge in our family. So if you're a parent, just real quick, you should spend some time thinking about, am I, number one, modeling this for my kid? And number two, am I teaching my kid how to lead themselves well? Am I teaching my kid how to move in a direction where they know how to prioritize what they value most of or what they value now, how they know how not to lie to themselves? Am I teaching and modeling for them what it looks like to put a group of people around them so that they find the support that they need, that'll help move them in the direction they need to go? Here's the thing I know about all of us. One of the things that we all would like to see happen is we would all like to be able to turn around to the generation behind us. I don't care how young or old you are. We'd all like to be able to turn around to the generation behind us and hand them a more united, a reunited States of America. We would all love to turn to the generation behind us and hand them a community and a country where there was no racism, no prejudice, no discrimination, no division. We'd love to hand them a country and a community that understood what it looks like to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, to see the points of view of other people, a country and community where we respect one another, even if we disagree with one another. This is what we all want. But we will not be able to hand that off if we don't first model it ourselves. And we won't be able to hand that off if we don't teach the next generation how to do it for themselves. And can I remind you, there's far more that hangs in the balance of whether you lead yourself well than you could possibly imagine. If you're a parent, you got some kids who wake up and they look in the mirror every day and they don't know how to lead that American in the mirror. And if you don't model it and you don't teach it, they'll go throughout their entire lives making the same mistakes over and over and over again. If you're a single adult, you've got some friends in your life right now. They're impacted by your ability or lack thereof to lead yourself well. You are impacting the quality and the direction of their life. And you owe it to yourself, but you owe it to them to figure out how to lead yourself well. And if you're a single adult and one day you want to get married, guess what? I don't know who your future spouse is, but I can guarantee you your future spouse wants to marry someone who knows how to lead themselves well. You owe it to your future spouse to figure this out and to become really, really good at this. If you're married, you owe it to your spouse. Not to point the finger and say, oh no, if they would just change and get better, everything would be better in our marriage. No, you owe it to yourself to look in the mirror and say, I'm going to own my part. I can't change them, so why am I focused on that? I'm going to own my part, and I'm going to lead myself well. So would you join me? Not in thinking about this for a day or a week. No, this is long term. Would you make a long-term commitment to overcome the challenge of leading the American you see in the mirror every morning? Would you figure out how to lead yourself well? Would you make a decision you're not going to lie to yourself, even if it makes you feel bad about yourself? Would you make a decision that you're going to prioritize what you value most over what you want now? And would you stop trying to lead yourself by yourself and surround yourself with some people who will support you and help you? Because the people all around you, the people all around me, and our communities need that, deserve that, and would be far better for that. Let me pray for us. Father, I'd be the first to admit this is one of those things that is easy to talk about, but it is really hard to practice. It's easy to nod our head and think about the people we wish heard this and would get everything squared away and straightened out, but it is hard to do it ourselves. So today and tomorrow when we wake up and look in the mirror, and the next day when we look in the mirror, would you help us to have the courage to tackle leading ourselves? Thank you for offering us the grace, the strength, the wisdom that we need to be able to do that. Help us to be people who demonstrate what it looks like to lead ourselves well, and as a result, contribute to creating a reunited, more united relationship, workplace, family, environment, community, and ultimately country. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.